I received a comment on my site that I found deeply interesting. The commenter asked me about a particular trend that he had heard about, having to do with astral projection, and the possibility of using various techniques to move into alternate worlds. This particular trend that he wrote to me about was happening in Tik Tok, which is a short-form video hosting site, where people may post videos up to 15 seconds long. This particular trend that he was talking about involved a TikTok group that was interested in something that they referred to as shifting. The commenter explained that this shifting allows the participant to essentially project astrally, and then shift their consciousness to a desired reality. In this particular case, most often to some kind of fantasy realm, another timeline, one that is very much like or just like a fantasy or sci-fi book or movie. He asked me if such a thing, in accordance with my practice, was possible, and he was also interested in knowing if such an ability meant that the archon, which is something that I discuss in great detail in some of my books, would then be a moot point. In other words, if one could shift into such other worlds, and stay there for extended periods of time, perhaps worlds where time did not function the same way that it does here, so that an hour in physical reality might mean a week in that other world, let us say, then such a thing as a demiurge or an archon, if such shifting was possible, would make such titans laughable, instantly escapable using such techniques. This is a wonderful comment and question certainly, and the idea that such an interesting trend is happening on TikTok is quite compelling to me. The commenter, who has experience with astral travel, said that many of the techniques discussed seemed viable, and as such it is wonderful for me to know that such a thing is happening, that people are using such sites to share information and experience, and indeed it has always been my hope that people begin to do things like this, exploiting modern technology, and develop modern versions of ancient techniques, and share those in an infinitely agile space, in order to develop highly creative new techniques and impetus, to accomplish those things that the average rational world believes to be impossible. There will always be, of course, a great deal of disinformation, incorrect information, to some degree, in such open forums. But in such agile spaces, where hundreds or thousands of people can express themselves quickly and openly, I feel that a serious practitioner will always gain a great deal from such sources. And the momentum of such a trend, the wave of it, is incredibly important in starting a push away from the morose aspects of current rational reality, where people are constantly being fed limitation and dour news, as opposed to being given wings to fly free. So, to me, this is perhaps the greatest aspect of this particular news shared by this commenter. But I also feel that in order to help with this trend, I need to give a little bit of nuanced information in accordance with the current of inner alchemy, in the hopes that such information may help people participating in those trends. To begin with, as I have mentioned on a few videos and certain books, more specifically the books, The Way of the Projectionist, and Out-of-Body Experiences Quickly and Naturally, such a thing as shifting is possible, doable, and indeed the way by which inner alchemists are able to begin to defy the great gravity, the dimensional density, of this rational reality, which I have described as being like a trap, like a cube, a small cube, that surrounds us and keeps us bound to a prison of materiality and limitation. Inner alchemists, having discovered techniques that allow them to participate in this kind of shifting, can move into such alternate spaces, alternate realities as it were, and there participate in incredible adventures and perception events, that can begin over time to greatly change the nature of their being, so that after they become adept in this shifting technique, after they have spent enough time in those other, more expansive realities, they truly become so free and so vast internally, that when they return to average human reality, in many ways you could say that they have become a kind of alien in their own world, in the average human world. Such shifting might seem trite to some, who might feel that going to a supposedly perfect fantasy reality might mean nothing in the real world. But such travels can vastly increase a person's intellect, can open them up to incredible diversity of space and time, and can indeed change them so much over time that, to put it bluntly, the average world becomes slow and banal in comparison. In accordance with inner alchemy, therefore, there are indeed many alternate spaces, spaces that either exist as separate worlds, such as the worlds potentially created in the quantum multiverse theory, or worlds created by one or a group of such shifters. So, there are in essence alternate worlds, and there are also created worlds, and each one is expansive and changing, growing, just like this world, but depending on the nature of that world, the laws applicable here might not exist there at all. For that reason, participating in those worlds can allow such shifters to become creators, adventurers, psychonauts of great prowess on some occasions, and being that such inner motion is so unlimited, at least in comparison to the mundane rational reality with all its density, such inner motion is indeed the way to greater human transformation. Of particular note in this comment is the idea that such worlds might allow a person to make the archon mood as it were, and this is the part that needs some nuance in my reply. While it is possible for such practitioners, such shifters, to begin to greatly expand the size of their world, and even expand the length of their own living existence, by shifting into dimensional spaces that do not have the kind of restrictions to be found here in this dense earthly reality, there are certain limitations that must be understood. Those limitations are indeed part of the challenge of this life, let us say, being that overcoming these limitations, these challenges, is the way towards greater growth, which then opens up more and more possibilities that are in essence beyond scope, beyond limitations of any kind as they progress, that indeed can lead such shifters to what may be referred to as eternity. I have on occasion referred to this challenge as gravity, in order to try to equate such a challenge to the modern quest of moving into space, the space age, and the current race to get off the planet. But this challenge or obstacle might also be referred to as density, vibration, or any of the other terms used by any particular discipline that might use and understand such techniques as astral travel, shifting, or the way of the projectionist. In this particular case though, the best term to explain these archonic limitations might be entropy. Now, entropy means in the most basic sense, the measure of the possible randomness of any particular system. And what this means within the context of shifting, is that, within that cube that I have spoken of, within that world that we find ourselves as material creatures, there exists a force that has created, that has helped to create, a particular kind of weight or friction within the founding parameters of that world. The entropy to be found within this material world means in a sense that there is only so much energy that can be accessed, supposedly, and that due to this lack, due to this finiteness to what is possible, anything and everything done within this particular dimensional cube, this trap, comes at a certain cost. In accordance to how close you are to that entropy-creating entity, how close you are to the ruler of this dimensional space, how close you are to the archon. This may sound complicated, but it all really boils down to the idea that depending on where you are in space-time, depending on where you are in any particular dimension, that entropy will always cost you in accordance to how close you are to the material dimension, which is the dimension where the archonic force rules completely. That entropy means that whatever you do will always cost some energy, some kind of fuel. Everything costs something. There is a barter, a give and take, a drag, a gravity, a friction, a density, to everything. In accordance with inner alchemy, such a fuel can be referred to as the amount of energy that any particular person has, the amount of energy contained within any particular person, personal energy. To simplify things further, inner alchemists can further refine such terms and methodology by saying that that energy could be perceived within the material world as focus. In other words, personal energy equals personal focus. The more energy the individual has, the more focus that they have, the more fuel that they have, and therefore the more ability that they have to participate in those alternate worlds that the shifters seek. Now, being that this fuel is all important, being that focus is all important, it is this personal power that inner alchemists seek at all costs. And further, it is this fuel that the archon feeds on. So, it is this fuel that the shifters need to spend increasing amounts of time in other worlds, but this fuel is also sought by the archon, and that is the nature of the challenge. And this fuel is all important, because it allows such shifters to not only extend the amount of time that they can shift, but it also allows them to manipulate to a far greater degree in those other worlds. This is the cost, and this is the challenge of the archon, that fuel. And this is the true nature of entropy in accordance with inner alchemy. For that reason, it is in that sense a battle with the archon. The archon is not moot therefore, because such shifters will always be fighting the entropy created by the archon. And when such shifters are able to go far enough, that this archonic entropy loses some of its power because they have gone so far from the material, let us say, they will discover that there are other entropy-generating entities out there, of titanic proportions, of ever-increasing proportions, that all shifters, that all projectionists must deal with. And indeed, if such shifters are worth their salt, if they have partaken in great adventures and have been able to fortify themselves and hone their weapons and their armor in those other dimensions, then these obstacles, this increasing complexity and entropy that must be overcome, becomes a source of growth, a way of empowerment. And in that overcoming, evolution happens, until the projectionist, the shifter, has gained so much fuel and so much ability, that they are able to tackle the greatest entropy-generating force for us, death itself. What I am trying to say is that there is a cost to things, nothing is free, at least not within this dimensional zone, and being that the shifters, the projectionist's body, their physical essence, is during physical life trapped within this dimensional zone, they must understand that they must contend with this cost. The Archon is not moot, it is our eternal challenge while physically alive, and this means at the very least that a shifter may need to work on their technique, before they are able to get the kinds of results that they seek. I mention this because it is my desire that such a trend continues, and for that to happen, the obstacles to such a magnificent interaction, this shifting, must be understood so that those that participate in it are not instantly discouraged, but knowing about this entropy to be found in this dimensional reality where they exist as physical beings, they can then incorporate this knowing, and use the infinitely creative space that they have been using thus far, to come up with better ways to overcome it. And let me be clear, in accordance with the practice and the doings of inner alchemy, shifting, the way of the projectionist, is indeed real, possible, and can lead to expanded realities of proportions that are beyond rational scope. And such shifting can allow such intrepid travelers and adventurers to participate in journeys of such vast proportions, that such individuals can truly be said to be living out sometimes even multiple lifetimes in realities beyond most people's imagination. But such travel, such shifting, is not free as it were. There is a cost, and that cost is that fuel that I spoke of. But this is the challenge, our greatest challenge, and if you would like to know more about this, how to participate in this shifting, and overcome these fuel limitations, I described these techniques in the trilogy of books, the Magnum Opus, The Way of the Projectionist, and The Way of the Death Defier. And I go into even further detail on the way of this shifting, the many methods possible and techniques, to be able to do this relatively quickly, in the book, Out-of-Body Experiences Quickly and Naturally. I will leave a link to these in the video description below if you are interested.